Hi, this is John Goodman. And for those of you who did not see part one, yes, this is John Goodman using PowerPoint in a webcast. PowerPoint can be a very useful tool. Overused, but it can be a very useful tool, and I think it'll be useful here. So for those of you who haven't seen part one, just a brief recap. The concept is that real estate brokers often write formulas. For example, sellers and buyers agree to split the cost of something. That's a formula. Something will cost X, and we're going to take that X and divide it by two. Real estate brokers commonly write formulas, and probably 98% of the time it works out well. But in the 2% of times where it doesn't work out well, it can be painful. And where I left you at the end of part one was on a particular PowerPoint slide. And even if you're really good at math, I think that it's worthwhile watching part one. It's an investment of about 12 minutes, so you have some context for this part. What this part is about, okay, what are you going to do? What are the steps? What are the tips to turn math awareness, part one, into drafting clarity? And the situation, real quickly, that was the motivation for this presentation was this situation where, in response to an inspection objection, the seller was going to incur an expense of $50,000. The seller was paying the buyer side broker commission, and the seller wanted an adjustment of the commission by $50,000. Well, what the buyer side broker thought that meant was if the sales price was 3 million, that there would be a subtraction from the 3 million of 50, and then that would get multiplied by the buyer side broker's commission of 3%, so that the buyer side broker's commission would be this $88,500. But that's not what the seller expected. The seller expected that the buyer side commission would be the 3 million, the initial price, times 3%, and then the $50,000 would be subtracted from the $90,000 that the buyer broker thought they were going to get. The buyer broker thought they were going to get a compensation with a little haircut, for the difference between 90,000 and 88.5. The seller thought that the buyer side broker would get a big haircut and only be paid $40,000. Okay, how do you avoid these mistakes? Number one, avoid formulas where possible. The tragedy of that example that I just gave you was all the numbers were known at the time the inspection resolution was written. The parties were too lazy to calculate out the math. Instead, they, basically had language. It wasn't quite this vague, but nevertheless, it was vague. The language did not support the seller's interpretation. The language did not support the buyer side broker's interpretation. But all the numbers were known. The sales price was known. The amount was known. The $50,000 was known. The 3% was known. Why didn't somebody calculate the numbers and figure out the misunderstanding at that moment in time? Avoid formulas where possible. Now, many situations, all the numbers are not known. You don't know how much the survey is going to cost. You don't know how much the roof repair is going to cost. You don't know how much it will cost to fix the sewer line. But consider this. Consider extending, for example, an inspection resolution deadline to give the parties time to determine the actual numbers and then use the actual numbers. That's tip number one. Number two, if you are writing formulas, confirm your shared understanding. The mistakes that get made aren't always math errors. Sometimes they're just communication errors, the kind of miscommunication that humans normally have. So how do you avoid misunderstandings? Well, the best way, I think, is to create and circulate spreadsheets. You create a spreadsheet allowing the stakeholders to play with the variables in the formulas and see if it produces the results that the stakeholders expect. Now, some of you are thinking, well, John, I don't have the ability to put together these spreadsheets. And I suggest to you, and I realize this will, well, I suggest to you to have the humility that if you don't have the capacity to write the spreadsheets, you might not be the right person to write the formula. Go to your employing broker, go to your CPA, go to your trusted colleague to get help on that. If you are inclined not to get help and you're not going to create the spreadsheets, consider creating varied examples. Examples. Well, if the cost of the survey turns out to be this much, then here's how much each of the stakeholders will cover. If the cost of the roof repair costs this much, then this is how that amount will be split amongst the stakeholders. Number 3, got to be especially careful with subtraction. Watch the prior video to understand that. One of the ways that, one of the things that causes mischief is sometimes we see phrasing that says, a seller will pay the difference between X and Y. Well, in which order? Do we take X minus Y or Y minus X? And that phrase, the difference between X and Y, doesn't suggest an order. In other words, suppose we're talking about the number $300,000 is one number, and the other number is $290,000. Are we doing 300,000 minus 290 is $10,000? Are we doing 290 minus 300, which is a negative $10,000? Okay, be careful with division. For the same reason, watch the prior video. With division, order matters. With division, grouping matters. Give some thought to whether the variables could produce negative numbers. Sometimes we'll talk about the sales price less all debt against the property and all transaction costs. Well, when we use phrasing like that, we assume it'll be a positive number, but sometimes the payoff on the loans exceed more than we think. Sometimes there's homeowners associations who have their clause in the transactions, and they nick the seller for money, and the seller is upside down, and the seller's proceeds are a negative number. Also consider whether variables could turn out to be fractions. And the reason it's relevant to understand whether numbers could turn out to be fractions is because, well, with multiplying 2 times 3, 2 times 3 equals 6. 3 times 2 equals 6. Order does not matter with multiplication. But it does matter if you're multiplying by percentages, because multiplying by a percentage is essentially the same thing as division. At least sorry, I'm going to lose some of you, if the percentage is a number less than 100%. So let me give you an example here. 25% times 20 is the same thing as 20 divided by 4. So that means multiplying by a percent that's less than 100% is the same thing as division. And so here's an example of how this comes into play. Notice 25, 20, and 10, 25, 20, and 10. They're all in the same order, but grouping matters. 25% of the sum of 20 plus 10 is 25% of 30. 25% of 30 is 7.5. But if you do it in this order, 25% times 20 is 4. 4 plus 10 is 14. Grouping matters with division, and it also matters for multiplication by percentages that are less than 1 100%. Avoid the lazy pro rata phrasing. In commercial real estate, we will see this, and the operating costs of the property will be split amongst the tenants on a pro rata basis. Well, what does that mean? Is that pro rata based on each tenant's square foot in the building? Are we talking about usable square feet in the building? What if the building is not fully occupied? Pro rata creates mischief in the real world. Ooh, I go from 6 to 8 here. Oh, that's because you can't see the 7. I'll tell you what the 7 is, even though you can't see it. What the 7 says is avoid the lazy use of the word net. We will take the seller's proceeds and the seller's net proceeds and multiply them by X. Well, what is the seller? What are we talking about? Are we talking about the seller's proceeds net of debt? Are we talking about the seller's proceeds net of debt plus real estate broker commissions? Are we talking about the seller's proceeds of debt minus real estate broker commissions less other transaction costs? Spell that out. What are the subtractions that lead to the net number? Number 8, if there are any subtraction, division, addition of negative numbers, give grouping descriptions to the other side, to the judges, to the mediators who are going to be interpreting this. So, if you have to divide something, you say first divide A by C. I'm sorry, first divide A by B, then multiply the result times C. Haste makes waste in life. Draft your formula. I encourage you to sleep on your drafting, look at it the next day, enhance the likelihood that you catch your own errors. Circulate drafts to your clients first to avoid misunderstandings between you and your client before this is you, send drafts to the other side. Consider running drafts by trusted colleagues. And then something else that's important is to run drafts by smart people who do not have knowledge of the market. One of the things that leads to drafting errors, when we have knowledge of the market, there are certain things that are logical to us. And because it's logical to us, we don't even sense the need to address it in the formula. But the judge or the mediator or the arbitrator who's interpreting your language doesn't have the knowledge of the market. And so if you want to avoid ambiguity, run things by your smart high school student who's studying trigonometry or something, and give them some inputs and see what results they come up with. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening this long. We have reached the end of this presentation. I have to stop the recording. So let's see if John can pull that off, stop the sharing, and then I'm getting ready to stop the recording. Oh, watch John on the typewriter. Okay, I'm one click away from stopping the recording. Ladies and gentlemen, remember my line. We live in a complicated world. Be careful out there. Catch you in the next one.